quiche is one of those things that's fantastic for breakfast, lunch, or even dinner. And I'm going to show you a really simple recipe using kale, ricotta, and one of my favourites, speck. So to start with, we need to make some pastry. And making your own pastry at home is actually really easy. You can either do it in a food processor, and that's what I'm going to be doing today, or you could just do it by hand. So to start with, we need 250 grams of plain flour or pastry flour, which is what I've got today, and we need 125 grams of butter. Now the butter needs to be cold, and I always remember the rule when I'm making pastry, half the fat to flour. So if you've got 250 grams of plain flour, you need 125 grams of butter. And 125 is about half of this butter. We're just going to cube it, and then we'll just put it straight into the food processor like this. Now, if you're doing this by hand, at this stage, you would use the tips of your fingers just to crumble the butter into the flour, so it's really easy. Also, we need an egg, so I just need the egg yolk, so we'll just crack that, separate our egg, beautiful big yolk there, and then that can go straight into the food processor. And now we need to put the lid on and just blitz this until a crumb forms, and then I'll add 50 millilitres of water until a dough forms. Okay, that's looking good. This is where we can start adding some more liquid. You can see there that we've got that perfect crumb. So I always add a little bit of water at a time just to ensure that the dough is not too wet. Depending on the flour you use, you may need a little bit more water or a little bit less. All right, lid goes back on. Okay, that's looking good. It's coming together now. So I'm just going to tip the dough onto the board, moving it. It's the perfect consistency there. It's not too wet or it's not too dry, but we still need to rest this dough so it doesn't shrink when we're cooking it. So what I like to do is just bring it together like this, form a perfect disc, just like this, and then we need to rest in the fridge. Now, I always wrap it in some Glad wrap, and this will ensure that our pastry stays nice and moist while it's chilling in the fridge for an hour. Once it's chilled, I'm going to roll it out and then we can blind bake it. So this pastry's been chilling and it's quite firm now, so it's time to roll it out. We'll just remove it from our Glad wrap. And I like to roll my pastry between two pieces of baking paper. I find it much easier. So we'll just get two large pieces, just like that. We'll place our pastry in the centre there, and with a rolling pin, what I like to do is just tap on the pastry just a little bit, and then we can start rolling. Now I'm going to roll this shortcut pastry until it fits into our tin with a little bit of overhang. So this tin over here is around 30 centimetres wide, so I'm going to keep rolling. Once that's done, I'll line the tin and then we can chill it. Okay, this is looking good now. It's nice and even, so I'm going to take one of the pieces of baking paper off. We'll get our tin over here. And then it's just easier to just roll this short crust pastry onto our rolling pin. Again, it gives you just a lot more control. And then in our tin, just carefully lay it in like that. This pastry is actually really forgiving, so if there's a few little holes there, you can patch it up and it won't affect the end result at all. So we're just moulding it in, and then what I do, with my hands, just press down around the rim just to get all the excess pastry off. You can see it fits perfectly. There's very little wastage here. And then with a fork, just a few little pricks, and now it's time to place it back in the fridge. So I like to line it now with some more baking paper, scrunch it up, just like that, and then place that in the pastry with some baking beads, or I just use some rice, really simple. We'll place that in there. This will just ensure that the pastry doesn't rise too much. So now this goes into the fridge. We need to refrigerate it for 1 more hour, and then I'm going to blind bake it at 190 degrees for about 15 minutes. For the last 5 minutes of baking, I actually removed the rice and the baking paper and just let it cook for an extra 5 minutes so it gets really golden brown like that. So onto the filling, the best part. I've got a bit of speck here. Now, I'm using speck today, but of course you could use anything you like. You could leave it out and have this as a vegetarian option, or you could use some ham or some bacon. So I'm just going to take the rind off just like that. We want around 150 grams of this, and we're going to cut it into lardons. So first of all, some strips just like this, and then into some small battens. Now you don't want this to be too chunky. Now I've got a pan on medium heat here, and we just want to render off the fat, and we want this to be super crispy. So in it goes. Also, I've got some kale here. Now I've got about 3 large stalks. I've taken the stalk off and I've just run my knife through it a few times, so we've got nice shredded pieces of kale. So this is not going to take long at all. We just want it to wilt just slightly. Don't forget, in the oven it will cook again. So give that a good toss with the speck, and we'll just let that cook for a few more minutes while we get our savoury custard ready. So a quiche traditionally has to have this savoury custard to be called a quiche. So first of all, we need a few eggs, 2 whole eggs, straight into a bowl here. I only use 2 eggs in this because I don't want it to be too eggy. Also, we need 200 millilitres of milk. In that goes. We need to season it with a little bit of salt and some freshly cracked pepper. Also, I love the addition of nutmeg. I'm a big fan of nutmeg, so we want about half a teaspoon of freshly grated nutmeg in there, just like that. Perfect. And we're going to give that a whisk, just with a fork is fine, just to bind that all together. And because I did say it was a ricotta, kale and speck quiche, I've got some ricotta here. So about 250 grams of ricotta, and we're just going to add that. This is really going to make our quiche really light and fluffy. We'll just break that ricotta up, just like that. And our savoury custard is ready to go. Now this is looking really good now. I'm going to take it off the heat now and just let it cool slightly before we start adding it to the pastry. Also, some Gruyere cheese. You could also use some cheddar if you like. And I'm just going to grate that. We want a good handful of this. About half of this block will be plenty. Fantastic. And now it's time to assemble. So I just get all this kale and speck, and we just place it in the base of the pastry. We'll just get another fork over here and just spread that out evenly. Just like that. Perfect. And now for our cheese, we're just going to sprinkle that again quite evenly so everyone gets a taste of that delicious Gruyere cheese. And last but not least, a lovely savoury custard. Be really careful and take your time doing this. You don't want it to overflow. Spread it out just like that. A little bit more in the centre there. And you can see I've actually got my tart shell on another tray. This is really important because it does leak. It'll go straight onto that tray and not make a mess in our oven. All right, that last bit, spread that out. And that is looking pretty good. This goes back into the oven for about 15 minutes or until that custard has set. I I am very happy with how this quiche has turned out. You can see that pastry hasn't shrunk too much. It's just perfect, and of course, golden brown. Now, the best way to get this quiche out of the mold is just to place it on an upside down bowl. You can see that base will just come out nice and easily. I've got a lovely platter here, and I'm just going to place it on this presentation plate. And that's it. That is a spectacular quiche. It's got everything you want in a quiche. It's got the speck in there, the savoury custard, that ricotta is just spectacular. And the addition of kale makes it a little bit healthy, I'm sure.